Okay, look, you think you know why Sears died. You've heard the story 1,000 times. Oh, it was Amazon. It was the internet. It was a dinosaur that couldn't adapt. And, sure, that's the polite version we tell at business school cocktail parties, but it's also kind of a lie. Or at least it's the boring version. The real story isn't about bad retail strategy. It's about a heist. Today, we are going to talk about the hedge fund that ate Sears. And I mean ate it, like fork and knife, napkin tucked into the collar, devoured it. Because if you look at the forensic accounting, which unfortunately for my sanity, I have, you realize that Sears didn't just die of natural causes, it was harvested. We're going to look at how one man turned an American icon into a personal ATM, and more importantly, I'm going to show you the blueprint for how to legally steal a $12 billion company without ever wearing a ski mask. Stick around because the mechanism for this is actually terrifyingly brilliant. To understand the crime, we have to understand the architect. Meet Eddie Lampert. Back in the 80s and 90s, this guy wasn't just a suit, he was the next Warren Buffett. He was a math prodigy working at Goldman Sachs in a very specific department called risk arbitrage. Now, arbitrage is just a fancy French word for buying a dollar for 50 cents. Eddie was trained to look at a company and not see people or products, but to see a bundle of assets, real estate, cash, inventory, that happened to be mispriced by the market. And he was good at it, scary good. His claim to fame was AutoZone. He bought a huge chunk of the company and basically forced them to stop growing. He was like, why open new stores? That costs money. Just take the cash from the register and buy back your own stock. It worked. The stock price went to the moon. Eddie made $1 billion, and he learned a very dangerous lesson. You don't need to know anything about selling brake pads to run a car parts store. You just need a spreadsheet. But then, something happened that turned Eddie from a regular Wall Street wolf into basically a Bond villain. In January 2003, Eddie was kidnapped, literally snatched out of a parking garage in Connecticut. 4 guys shoved him into an SUV and held him hostage in a Days Inn motel bathtub for 28 hours. They demanded $5 million. Now, most of us would be freaking out, right? Not Eddie. He actually negotiated his own release. He sat there, handcuffed to a toilet, and convinced these guys that the cops were already tracking them, and that if they didn't let him go, they were doomed. He promised he'd pay them later, and they let him go. They dropped him off at a highway exit. They got caught a few days later because, and I cannot make this up, they used Eddie's credit card to order a pepperoni pizza to the motel room while they were holding him hostage. Criminal masterminds, they were not. But that experience changed him. He became paranoid, reclusive. He moved to a high-security estate on Indian Creek Island in Florida, literally a bunker for billionaires, and he stopped going into the office. He started running his empire remotely through video screens. His employees started calling him the Wizard of Oz or the Floating Head because he'd just appear on a monitor in the boardroom, shout orders, and vanish. So, from his bunker, Eddie makes his move. In 2003, he buys Kmart out of bankruptcy. Everyone laughed. Kmart was a joke, but Eddie didn't care about selling cheap t-shirts. He saw that Kmart owned hundreds of stores in prime locations. He saw land. He used the cash from Kmart to buy Sears in 2005 for $11 billion. He explicitly said, Kmart has the locations, Sears has the brands. He didn't buy a retailer, he bought a real estate portfolio that just happened to sell washing machines. And this is where I have to ask you guys something. Pause the video for a second and tell me in the comments if you were handcuffed to a motel toilet with $5 million on the line. Are you negotiating with the kidnappers like Eddie, or are you just giving them the money? Because honestly, I'm buying the pizza. I'm buying them a car. I am not negotiating. Let me know below if you have nerves of steel or if you're normal like me. Okay, Act 2. The Philosophy. Eddie was a huge fan of Ayn Rand. You know, the author who wrote Atlas Shrugged and basically argued that selfishness is a virtue and altruism is for losers. Well, Eddie decided to run Sears using pure objectivist philosophy. He thought, if I make all my managers fight each other, the weak ones will die and the strong ones will make me money. He called this system SOAR. He broke Sears into 30 different autonomous business units: appliances, tools, clothing, IT. They were all separate companies, and they had to compete for resources. If the clothing department wanted the IT department to fix their computers, they had to sign a contract and pay them. If tools wanted to be in the weekly ad circular, they had to outbid the appliances for the space. It turned the company into the Hunger Games. And this led to some absolutely insane situations, like the Mother's Day circular. In retail, Mother's Day is huge. You sell jewelry, perfume, nice clothes. But at Sears, the sporting goods president outbid everyone else for the cover of the Mother's Day ad. So on Mother's Day, the front page of the Sears catalog wasn't a necklace, it was a doodle-bug mini bike for little boys. Because one guy wanted to win his internal bonus, the whole company lost millions in sales. It got pettier. Executives started bringing laptops with privacy screen protectors to meetings. Why? Because they were terrified their colleagues from other divisions would steal their data. You had the appliance division realizing they had to pay a royalty fee to the branding division to sell Sears' own Kenmore fridges. So what did they do? They stopped selling Kenmore and put Samsung fridges in the front of the store because it was cheaper for their specific budget. They were cannibalizing their own best brands to save a buck. My favorite story is the battery blockade. Sears owned Craftsman tools. Sears owned Die Hard batteries. Iconic duo, right? Put a Die Hard battery in a Craftsman drill. Boom, done. But the two division presidents hated each other so much that the Craftsman guy refused to pay the internal transfer price to the Die Hard guy. So Craftsman started buying generic batteries from an outside vendor. Sears was paying a stranger to make batteries because its own left hand wanted to strangle its right hand. While the managers were playing gladiator in the boardroom, the stores were rotting. Roofs were leaking. Escalators were broken. Employees were hanging bed sheets to hide empty shelves. Why? Because Eddie wasn't spending money on maintenance, he was spending it on stock buybacks. Between 2005 and 2012, Sears spent $6 billion buying its own stock. $6 billion! Just imagine if they had put that $6 billion into, a website or logistics. They could have built a competitor to Amazon Prime. Instead, they lit that money on fire to artificially prop up the stock price, which Eddie owned most of. And guess what? The stock that they bought back at $100 a share eventually went to 30 cents. That money didn't just disappear, it was incinerated. But here is the smoking gun, the masterpiece of the heist. By 2015, Sears is bleeding cash. It needs money. So Eddie creates a new company called Seritage Growth Properties. It's a real estate investment trust, or REIT. Eddie is the chairman of Sears. He is also the chairman of Seritage. So Eddie, as Sears, sells 235 of the best Sears stores to Eddie, as Seritage, for $2.7 billion. Creditors sued, claiming Sears sold those stores way too cheap, like hundreds of millions too cheap. But here's the kicker. Sears now had to pay rent on the stores it used to own, and the lease had a recapture clause. This meant if a store was actually in a good mall, Seritage could just kick Sears out, cut the space in half, and rent it to Whole Foods or a luxury gym for 3 times the price. So Sears was stuck paying rent on the bad stores and losing the good stores. It was a machine designed to transfer real estate wealth from the retailer to the hedge fund.
And it wasn't just real estate. They spun off Land's End, forcing it to borrow money to pay Sears a $500 million dividend. They spun off Orchard Supply Hardware. Every time, the asset got loaded with debt, and the cash went upstream to the mothership and eventually to the shareholders. While the physical assets were being stripped, Eddie had a vision for the future. He didn't believe in retail, he believed in data. He launched Shop Your Way, a loyalty program that he wanted to be bigger than Amazon Prime. But instead of making shopping easier, it made it a nightmare. He cut cashier hours but forced them to pitch this complicated data mining scheme to every single person buying a pair of socks. He launched My Gopher, which was basically Uber Eats for Sears, way before it was cool. But because he refused to invest in logistics, there was no back end. You'd order a hammer online for pickup, and the system would just ping a random floor employee to run to the shelf and grab it. But since they stopped stocking the shelves to save money, the hammer wasn't there. It was a digital fantasy built on a rotting physical reality. The headquarters in Hoffman Estates, Illinois became a tomb. It was a massive, sprawling campus, but they turned off half the lights to save on electricity. The roof of the main atrium started leaking, so they just put buckets and rolling dumpsters in the lobby to catch the rain. Employees called it the ghost ship. They were working in the dark, literally and metaphorically, while the guy in charge was video calling in from his fortress in Florida.
Finally, on October 15, 2018, the inevitable happened. Bankruptcy. But for Eddie, this wasn't the end. It was the final purchase. You see, over the years, Eddie's hedge fund had been lending money to Sears to keep the lights on, but these loans were secured. That means they were backed by the inventory and the real estate. He was the CEO borrowing the money and the lender lending the money. In the bankruptcy auction, Eddie offered $5.2 billion to buy the remaining 400 stores. But he didn't write a check, he used a credit bid. He basically said, hey, you guys owe me $1.3 billion. I'll forgive that debt if you give me the company. The creditors went nuts. They called it a heist. They said the whole thing was rigged from the start. But the judge approved it because the alternative was firing 45,000 people immediately. So Eddie walked away with the assets, and the old Sears estate was left administratively insolvent. There wasn't even enough cash left to pay the lawyers. And the headquarters, that massive campus in Hoffman Estates, in 2024, the demolition crews moved in. They tore it down. And you know what they're building there now? Data centers. The irony is perfect. Eddie wanted a data company, and now the ruins of his empire are being paved over for server farms. People call Eddie Lampert a failure. They say he destroyed an icon. But look at the math. He bought Kmart for pennies, he used it to buy Sears, he sold the real estate to himself, he collected interest on the loans, he stripped the assets, and in the end, he owns what's left. From a retail perspective, it was a tragedy. But from a hedge fund perspective, it might have been the perfect crime. Sears didn't die because it couldn't compete with Amazon. It died because it was worth more dead than alive to the guy holding the knife. If you want to know about more corporate disasters that were actually carefully planned demolitions, hit that subscribe button. And seriously, let me know about the kidnapping negotiation in the comments. I'm still thinking about the pizza. Thanks for watching.